In a world where horrid stenches and piercing screams come not from the realms of fantasy, but from the nightmare of reality. Come two heroes, bonded by love and the kind of desperation only parents can know.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Behold, RPGs and Baby Makes 3, the greatest podcast in the history of all podcasts, by parents who have made a podcast about being gamers with a baby. Did I mention it's a podcast? Here are your hosts, Gretchen Hilmers and Rob Hessler.
This is RPGs and Baby Makes 3, Gretchen Hilmers, the luminescent Gretchen Hilmers, Rob Hessler, and our special guest for this week, a return guest, Benjamin Sperduto. Ben, it's so good to have you back. Last Redoubt games, last time we had you on, it was for your augmented Kickstarter, and now you're doing a Kickstarter for Hounds of the Tsar, which is a little bit of an older game, but you're putting it out in print now. And so glad to have you on. Welcome back onto RPGs and Baby Makes 3.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk all about this game, and I love it. I had a chance to read it. It was part of the augmented Kickstarter, the digital package, which I got all of your old games. And I'm just going to say right now, with the Kickstarter going on now for Hounds of the Tsar, which runs through the Tuesday, the October 22nd through 11 p.m. Eastern time. Man, that's such a good value. You sent so many games. And there was like that bonus game that was like 75 pages. You're like, I'm not really done with this, but you guys could just have it. I mean,
it's getting it off my chest more, I think, than everybody else's chest.
Release it out into the world. But I want to talk about Hounds. We're going to talk about Hounds of the Tsar. But before we do that, I have to ask you, first off, how do you pronounce Oprichniki?
Oprichniki.
Oprichniki, okay.
That's the way I've heard it pronounced, so I could be wrong.
So that's a critical element of the game because you play one of them and that is your role in this game. So let's just start from the beginning. Tell us what the game is all about. Like, describe it to everybody that's out there listening.
So the basic premise of Hounds of the Tsar is it kind of falls into the trope of you playing as a monster hunter, supernatural kind of task force. But the twist on this is that it is set in 16th century Russia during the reign of Ivan the Terrible. Specifically during a period of time when Ivan the Terrible launches into this kind of strange strategy of reforming Russian society and creates this, it's not really an organization, I kind of characterize it that way, and it's been characterized this way, but creates this kind of class called the Oprichnina. So it's kind of applied in a couple different ways. So technically speaking, the Oprichnina is the portion of Russia that is under the domain of the Tsar and is under his direct control and is ruled over or administrated by his chosen people who are kind of governing over it. Basically what happened was Ivan the Terrible, who never got along with the boyar noble class of Russia, he kind of he takes his ball and goes home at some point. He abdicates, he retires to this estate outside of Moscow and is like, ski guys and get him. He's mad because Ivan the Terrible is always upset about something. They're not supporting his Livonian War stridently enough. He's having all kinds of problems. So he decides to go and out there and like basically the boyar class who can't really administer anything without the Tsar and his government, because like all political authority kind of flows from the Tsar sort of thing. They come back hat in hand and are like, please come back. We'll give what you want. Please come back. And he says, okay, here are my conditions. I'm dividing the country into two. All of the people who are loyal to me get all the best land, and the rest of you get the scraps. He kind of like creates this group, this class of people called the Oprichniks. And there's all sorts of, I mean, honestly, it's a hard period of Russian history to kind of like get on top of, especially if you're reading the English sources, which are kind of limited.
Right.
But it's kind of popularly remembered as this period of time where this kind of like precursor of a secret police force is sort of running around the country, persecuting enemies of the Tsar, kind of like they're kind of an instrument of the Tsar's will directly upon the people everywhere. And he kind of bypasses all the other administrative elements of the state, which in 16th century Russia are pretty chaotic and ineffective. And it should be mentioned that the Oprichnina are chaotic and ineffective, and the whole institution is scrapped after they like screw up the defense of Novgorod. I think it's Novgorod during the war, the Livonian War, and the city falls. And Ivan says, "All right, screw this," and he scraps the whole thing, and like it's a whole big thing. But it's a very short period of Russian history.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But it's remembered as it kind of lives on in Russian lore. There's a whole opera about it that's written in, I think, the 19th century. The Soviet history deals with it in this weird way of framing it as like a precursor of like the communist uprising, because Ivan strips away the landed nobility of their titles and gives it to his loyal servants who are men of the people, quote unquote. Of course, like that's not at all what this looks like. But there's like kind of a whole fascinating like subgenre of history of like how Soviet historians like reinterpret different aspects of Soviet history. Yeah, so sorry, I've like gone way far afield.
No, but you know what? Actually, what's so interesting is about that is you're nerding out on this, and this was going to kind of lead into my next question. I think that you're kind of there. I mean, what inspired you to write this game about this very specific period and setting in history? Because I mean, you're obviously really passionate about it. It's like bouncing around all in your brain here. So, like, what kind of got you? Like, I mean, thinking I really want to write a game about this specific period?
Yeah, so it seemed like a good spot to kind of shoehorn a game into, because it would be very easy to just go with the idea of, okay, we're in 16th century Russia. There's probably supernatural things afoot, a classic gaming trope. I've got this weird organization that exists for a very short period of time that is directly loyal to the Tsar. So it kind of created this idea of, all right, well, the players can be drawn from all sorts of weird or disparate elements of Russian society, thrown together into this group, and they're all personally dependent upon and loyal to the Tsar. And then I could kind of throw in the angle of, well, maybe the Tsar is not on the good side here. I mean, it's Ivan the Terrible, probably not. But like maybe there's some sort of supernatural corruption going on with the Tsar, and maybe there's a magical connection that you have to him that enables you to do, cool role-playing, historical role-playing stuff. So that was kind of where the angle came in. But as far as like why I wanted to do a game about it, I don't know if I mentioned this last time I was on, or to probably mentioned it here or there. My master's is actually in Russian history. Right. So I studied a period that was a little bit after this, because I studied the 17th century primarily. But you kind of go back and you're doing this whole kind of whole era. So I was always really fascinated by Ivan the Terrible, because it's just one of the most unique periods in Russian history, which is really saying something, because Russian history is kind of
few.
But especially because there's probably the most famous imagery associated with Ivan the Terrible, aside from like the famous artwork, is from Sergei Eisenstein's two-part film series that comes out in the 1940s. What's the actor's name? Starring Nikolai Cherkasov, which are just stunning works of film. And they cover this whole era of the Oprichnina. And you get to see these kind of, these sort of roving gangs of Ivan the Terrible running around the realm, purging the realm of the Tsar's enemies. And there are descriptions of them from kind of contemporaneous descriptions of them. It's questionable accuracy. A lot of the written record for the time is either like propaganda written by people opposed to the regime or by foreign mercenaries who were trying to impress other European lords into giving them jobs. That's like a whole time-honored trope of like early modern Europe. But they're described as they wear black. They have these dog heads on their saddles. They carry a broom with them because they're sweeping away the enemies of the Tsar. It's all this imagery. I just had to throw it into a game. And I loved the idea of, and this is something that really comes across in the Eisenstein films, is the paranoia and suspicion of Ivan the Terrible that filters down into just every aspect of Russian government and Russian society. You could argue that that's kind of a through line through a lot of Russian history is this paranoia and suspicion of who's talking to who can I trust. The guy that runs my son's music school, actually, he's an American lawyer who works at a firm. He has a firm in Moscow. So he kind of represents like American businesses in Russia. And he was explaining to me one time that, the thing about Russian society and Russian culture is that like people in like the if you're in like someone's like inner circle or kind of inner family, like it's like a trust, and a love like none you will ever experience. But if you're outside of that, good luck. good luck breaking into or winning someone's confidence or getting someone, to support you on something, because, decades, centuries of these just oppressive regimes, an omnipresent police state, informants everywhere. Like you just don't know who you can trust. So I really wanted to bring that angle into the game.
That's so cool. I love the way that you're describing that and your passion for it, and it shows in the game. And one of the things I think is really interesting, and I think this really comes from your extensive knowledge of Russian history, is the backgrounds that you put together, the sort of character creation tables where players have the option of sort of rolling or choosing, and they're very interesting. You've got character origin, flaws, and secrets. There's a characteristic called encounter, which essentially describes something horrible that the PC has seen before gameplay begins. And then as well as qualities, which can have in-game mechanical implications. But all of them feel like they're coming from a place of real understanding of the period, where when you put all of the pieces together, you have like a character that somebody like me who doesn't necessarily know barely anything about Russian history, like I felt like I could randomly roll on this and then like start to find myself in the mindset of like what one of these characters would be. So I don't know, beyond sort of rolling for attributes, and we'll get to that in a second, what were you kind of going for with these tables as far as the character creation process goes? And sort of what are you hoping that I mean, am I kind of falling into what you were looking to get out of players, like playing the game like, oh, because not everybody's going to know 16th century Russian history.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally what I was aiming for. What's funny is I think if I'm remembering correctly, because like this game has existed in some way, shape, or form for many years. So I think a lot of those random tables actually preceded a lot of the rules for the game. They were kind of the first thing that I came up with. So you start out with kind of like, and I tried to like weight the charts a little bit so that, you're more likely to kind of come from one background than another. I always loved the random character creation from the Warhammer role-playing game or the Warhammer fantasy RPG, which like you would roll out your stats and then you roll your career randomly, and you go into the game thinking like, oh, it's Warhammer. I'm gonna be like a knight of the Empire or something. It's like, oh, I'm a rat catcher. Okay. I'm a barber surgeon. Wait, what? So I kind of tried to shoehorn in a lot of the kind of the cultural diversity of 16th century Russia. So, more often than not, you're going to be a Russian who is from like a couple different like social classes, but you could be from the noble class. You could be a foreigner. You could be, you could be from all of these kind of different places. And then from there, I wanted to have I knew it needed to have ready-made backgrounds because most people are going to come into this not having firm grip on or firm understanding of what 16th century Russia looks like or what the social structure looks like and all of that. So I tried to make some of those background charts. So like creating like different relationships that you have, how did you come into the Tsar's surface? How did you first encounter the supernatural? Because I definitely wanted it to be like you're kind of someone who knows stuff is up. There's weird things going on in the dark corners of the realm. So kind of laying out what that is, and then the secret aspect was really important because I knew I wanted suspicion to be a big component of the game. So there had to be something that you did something or a family member did something that if it were to come out, you would be in deep trouble.
Yeah, I love that actually. And what's kind of interesting, and that kind of gets, you've been talking a lot about the paranoia aspect. And what I love is that you've got actually a couple of mechanics in the game that play up on that. There's the randomized sort of mechanic of getting black marks. And we'll talk about that in a little bit because I want to talk about the Tsar die, which I'm really hoping that people watch this will back here the Kickstarter so that way that special die will be unlocked with a stretch goal because that's what I really want. But also the in addition to that, you've got the loyalty track, and there is this really interesting, and Gretchen and I were talking about it in the car today, this really interesting sort of mechanic where if you do certain things, even if they actually might help you succeed in a given mission, they could actually point more suspicion on your character. And ultimately, the other players could decide that you're going to be executed. Yeah. And I thought that was so fascinating. First of all, it's super brutal, but I kind of like, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit of a sadist, but I kind of like that when you're thinking, like there's almost two levels of the game that you're thinking about. You're thinking about succeeding at your mission and doing whatever it takes, but then also remaining in the good graces of not only the Tsar, but of the people who are your party members. And it's like a player versus player mechanic that's built into the game. I don't know. So talk about that.
Interesting enough, I conversely, you can support your co-players as well, so you can work together or you can tear each other down. I love this competition that seems to be happening.
Yeah, I tried to make it, and this is like something I tinkered with a lot because, I wanted there to be that element of being able to accuse people, and like trying to give it like just enough of a mechanical element that you could kind of be incentivized to do it, but not so much that you're constantly like just throwing everybody under the bus, but more of like because what I wanted to emulate was that idea of, you know, you're in the middle of doing something and somebody looks over at you and it's like, oh, that was interesting. I'm just gonna make a note of that. Something happened here. And like, I mean, kind of one of the bad things about it is that like it, you know, I had run the system by a few people, and, you know, they had pointed out that like one of the problems is that, you know, you could kind of get ganged up on and just get dragooned by the other players and be in trouble. And, you know, I thought long and hard about it and eventually just came to the conclusion. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, that's what getting unfairly accused is.
Yeah.
That's what happens. So, so I wanted to kind of bring that in as much as I could. And a lot of the inspiration for that system comes from a game called Cold City that we buy. It was released. Contested Ground Studio was the name of the company did it. And oh god, I'm totally blanking on the guy's name. I'll remember it like halfway through. He also did the game. Malcolm Craig, that's his name. He's a Scottish guy who's now actually a history professor. And it was this game where you played as members of a multinational police force in post-World War II Berlin. So like, and all the players had to be from a different country. So one player was French, one player was British, one player was British, one player was Soviet. And there was a trust element. You had to like rank the other players according to trust. And if you really trusted someone, they could help you out on your tests, and like went back and forth. And everybody had a secret that you were trying to keep. You were trying to keep from everybody else. It was all that kind of stuff. So a lot of that inspiration came directly out of that game, which is like fantastic. And like, sadly, it's out of print and like you can't even get it digitally anymore.
I know. I just looked it up, and like it's not even on Drive-Thru-RPG. Like you can't.
Yeah, that creator also did a game called A State, which is now getting. It just got a Kickstarter for a second edition from Handiwork Games, I think. So I'm hoping that they can talk Malcolm into doing another edition of Cold City, because it was incredible. But yeah, so I wanted to kind of get that same feel of like always having to like weigh every action that you take, of thinking about like, how is this going to be perceived? Because ultimately that's one of the things that kind of rips the Oprichnina apart, is that they're constantly informing on each other. And I mean, that's kind of what tears like a lot of these kind of like, you know, secret police organizations apart, is because even they don't know who to trust anymore, you know. And like, it's kind of like the age old like authoritarian impulse, is you have like one secret police agency that's being watched by another secret intelligence agency, and like, so you're always kind of like trying to bounce off the two.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just so that people know, it's like there are, within the loyalty mechanic, there are stipulations as to what allows you to accuse or defend a particular person. And to be fair, it is a little bit easier to defend one of your fellow party members than it is to accuse them.
You have to like build up kind of the basis for an accusation before you can just go leveling them. I think there was an earlier version of the game where you basically could just like accuse anybody at any moment. And I was like, okay, well, that's, having seen like a Vampire the Masquerade game explode into like, you know, acrimony and like ruined friendships. Like, okay, we need something a little bit more, than that.
We'll have to, at one point, Amanda, this happened to, you know, Amanda, who's often on the podcast, and she is a member of our gaming group. Her and another member of our gaming group were betrayed in a vampire game by a very, very close friend, like a close personal friend. And their friendship was never the same. It was like a long running game, and it was so brutally. So that's kind of these kind of things can be dangerous. You have to know going in. And when Gretchen and I were talking about it before earlier today, and we were kind of discussing what we might go over, it's like, I think I'm okay. I love this idea if I know it going in. If you know that part of it is you're trying to carefully navigate that kind of mechanic, then I'm totally down with it. It's when you don't expect it that it's like, okay, that's when you ruin friendships. You know what I mean? So
and honestly, I felt that having some type of a mechanical element kind of like takes the teeth out of that a little bit. Mm-hmm. You know, it's kind of like in a, you know, like everybody gets mad when you get betrayed in Risk, or board game X, but like it's kind of like built in, like it's coming. You know, well, I guess Risk is a bad example because there's not an example of that. I guess a better one would be like Diplomacy, where like betrayal is kind of baked into the game, or the Game of Thrones board game is kind of like the game like incentivizes you to betray one another. So I felt that like by having kind of that upfront mechanic where you kind of know how it works and you know how you get accused, how other people can get accused, that kind of gives you that kind of gives you a little bit of knowledge going in that I think takes the teeth out of it a little bit.
So we're talking about, before we move off of the kind of narratively based mechanics that you put in here, let's just kind of hit on two others that I wanted to mention really quickly that I think play a major role in the game, but they're kind of, just like a half a page in the book. And so, they're not as necessarily obvious, and that's the black marks and taint. So first of all, black marks are basically accrued randomly. I mean, it's kind of like you get bad luck and you get these black marks. And then ultimately that kind of brings in the psychic connection that you have with the Tsar, and you have to appease the Tsar, essentially. But let's talk about, and I want to talk more about the Tsar die in a second, so let's keep that to the back. But talk a little bit about taint, because I thought this was interesting in that you kind of take on these supernatural like abilities and mutations, essentially, but eventually your character is taken from you. You essentially become a monster, and you're no longer a player character anymore.
Yeah, I've always loved the. I mean, I know I had mentioned Warhammer earlier, and I guess that's kind of like a bigger influence on this that I realized. I always loved the way that chaos magic worked, and how it would just. The more contact you had with chaos, the more chance there was for it to corrupt you. And like, I love nothing more than a random mutation table.
For sure. Yeah.
Or a random like spell disaster table. They're just the best. Actually, just random tables in general. I love
tables. Tables are great.
Yeah. So I wanted to have this idea that kind of like the power that you're drawing upon when you're either invoking the Tsar's name and invoking the will of the Tsar to try to succeed on a task, which is what the Tsar die is used for. And it's very tempting because it can be used for pretty much anything. Like it's very limited. It's not very, when you're limited by how many you have. But
like you said, like it is usable. You can essentially, the rule states that the character player can make an argument for why they should be allowed to use it. And the game master is essentially encouraged to sort of allow it if they make a good argument. So essentially, if you have good role players, it's almost always available, like if you want to use it.
Yeah, you can use it quite a lot. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you're serving the will of the Tsar, and anything that you're doing is furthering the will of the Tsar. So yes, I can invoke the Tsar's power. But tapping into that power could potentially go badly. And especially if you fail. And then you start, it's basically this idea that like you're tapping into this power. And if you're failing and you're using it badly in the eyes of the Tsar, you're kind of accruing these black marks, these negative marks. And as you get more of them, you'll get to a point where you start suffering from the corruption because you're tapping into that power that has somehow corrupted the Tsar and is slowly sort of poisoning the entire land. But the paradoxical thing is, as you start getting that corruption and you start getting that taint and you start getting those mutations, most of them are actually really useful.
Yes, they are.
So there's a dynamic that you're becoming more powerful the more taint you acquire, but you're also becoming less human and getting closer to potentially going over to becoming a complete inhuman monster and losing control of the character.
Yeah, I love mechanical things like that, which are crunchy useful. Like in a game, like you can write it down on the sheet and you can say, oh, this is a cool power. Like, and you can look at your character sheet and say that. But then it also has like a really interesting like narrative thing that's attached to it, because I mean, like when I think about playing this game, what excites me is like the notion of my character becoming more and more twisted and more reliant on those kind of like powers. Like, because you're starting to be like, you've like, there's almost a kind of like a god complex or something like built into it. Like, oh, I can do these things that other people can't. And you become almost like quote unquote more invincible, but actually that's what is making you more inhuman and like more twisted, and ultimately a character that is played by the game master and no longer played by you, you know?
Yeah, and I did try to kind of build it up in such a way that it's actually kind of difficult to get to the point where you start getting a lot of those mutations. Like, because it relies on kind of a lot of randomness. Mm-hmm. So you have to get kind of unlucky several times in a row over a period of time. So it's not something, it's usually something that's more likely to happen if you play for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. You don't have my dice. You don't know, Ben.
I like that randomness. I like the idea that, you know, things could just go badly and you could start getting, you know, you could start building up a lot of corruption if you get a run of bad luck. But I think, you know, generally speaking, you know, it's not something that you'll normally see in like just a session, you know, a few sessions. But if you play for a long campaign, you know, long enough, that'll start coming up. And you know, I probably should have emphasized it a little bit more in the text, but I feel like it's kind of a thing that's fairly obvious. Where a lot of these powers that you're getting are not things that are easily concealable.
No, it's obvious in the text. Yeah, like claws. I mean, like
your arm turns into a tentacle, like that's kind of hard to hide. So
a little bit.
So it does kind of make your life a lot more difficult. And then of course you've got the other people around you who are like, how much do I trust this guy? So yeah, so it's but he's also really useful. So do I really want to be throwing him to the wolves? Yeah, so I was kind of trying to walk a little bit of a balance there with that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's what's great is because that's really the appeal of a long-term campaign where you kind of know, it's almost like, you know, like the a lot of the White Wolf games and things like that, where you know by the end, if you play it right, you kind of lose. I mean, you know what I mean? Like you're kind of moving towards like a darkness where the character becomes unplayable. And that is really appealing. I guess maybe I am a sadist. The more I think about this, the more I'm like, it's like I always like to play Call of Cthulhu because I kind of always hope inside that my character will die during the session, get ripped apart by some horrible monster. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the kind of the real basics, like the rule set. You've got it based around 4 attributes: physical, intelligence, wits, and faith. And you're using D6s for almost every roll except for the Tsar die, the Tsar die, which is a D4. And kind of how would you describe the mechanics in general? Like, I mean, as far as how would you relate House of the Tsars to, you know, other games? Like, I mean, it seems like it's fairly simple mechanic as far as like deciding success versus failure and such.
Yeah, so the your basic test is you're rolling the 3 dice, and you know your attributes are going to range from about like 3 to 18, and you're just trying to roll under your attributes. And that kind of like 3d6 roll under is it's sort of stolen straight from GURPS. That's kind of the same like resolution system that GURPS uses. I just liked the 3d6 instead of a single die because it's a little more of a bell curvy kind of distribution. So you're kind of more likely to succeed than not most of the time at the things you're good at. And then also, since you're rolling the 3 dice, that made it easier to implement the qualities, which are kind of your skills. I'm not sure why I called them qualities instead of skills, honestly. If I went back, I would probably change that.
Well, it does add a certain unique, I think the flavor of them, the flavor... Yeah, the flavor's not quite skills. They're like, they are features almost. They're more like features than skills.
Yeah, it's kind of things that you're sort of innately good at, you're practiced at. And basically the way it works is you make your attribute roll, and then if you are performing a test that your quality applies to, you can re-roll any of those dice. And so having the 3d6 made it so that it's like, oh, okay, I can re-roll multiple dice. I don't have to re-roll all of them. I can just re-roll one or here or there. And then the Tsar die is kind of a special die that when you roll it, it has, it's basically coded outcomes. If you roll a 4, you automatically succeed. The Tsar favors you. If you roll a 3 is like a -3 on your rolls, because remember, you're trying to get low rolls, so a negative is good. 2 is a -2, and then if you roll 1, nothing happens unless you fail the test. If you fail the test and you roll a 1, you have drawn the Tsar's ire, and that's how you get a black mark.
Yeah, that's so cool.
There was an earlier version where like any time you rolled a 1, you got a black mark, and I was like, that's a 1 in 4 chance. That's not good.
That's advanced Hounds of the Tsar.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
So combat is super simple, super quick. I kind of stole the basic combat mechanic out of games like Into the Odd and Electric Bastion Land, where you don't roll to hit, you automatically hit, and then you just roll whatever damage value your die has, and then if you have armor, you roll the armor and you subtract the armor from the damage value, apply that to your hit points. Once you get through the hit points, you start reducing your physical attributes, and then once those are gone, you're dead. I love the argument that was made for, I think it was for Into the Odd specifically, where you don't, in a game, and it's kind of like a rules-lite system, you don't want combat to last long.
Right.
You kind of want combat to have like almost like a 3-act structure, where like the battle starts, you make your initial decisions, and then you hit a turning point where you can kind of tell pretty quickly which direction this fight is going to go in. It's like, okay, either we're going to win in another turn or two, or we need to get out of here because we're going to lose. We have misjudged the situation and we need to get out now. And then you have the kind of the conclusion, which you're either running or you're winning, or you stand your ground and you die. You don't die, because the rules stipulate when you go down to, when you reduce 0, you can kind of decide whether you're taking someone captive or whether you're killing them or something like that. It's kind of just, I mean, I think for a game like, like Pathfinder or like even D&D, where you have like a lot of tactical choices to make, those games are kind of built for combat. They're built to be played on a grid. They're built to make, you have all of these abilities on your character sheet that like interlock with these other tactical decisions you can make. So kind of like a quick and dirty combat system in that kind of a game sort of like undermines the whole premise of the game. Which does not say the game's all about combat, but like that's what your character is kind of built to do, or what your abilities are built to. You
get experience and advance for defeating monsters. I mean,
right.
That's the main way. Now, that's not the only way, but there's a reason why there's an XP value underneath every monster, because you're supposed to kill it and take that XP. I mean, that's like the point of it. Yeah, I like what you describe, how you describe the combat. It's a system as highly abstract as intended to be fast, flexible, and brutal. And it most definitely is, particularly when you consider the ambush mechanic, the ambush part of it, where if you're ambushed or you are the ambusher, you're pretty much winning. I mean, it's like, it is such a huge advantage to get the jump on your opponent, or a disadvantage for them to get the jump on you, because it's really going to hurt.
Kind of drawing on, like, if you remember, like, original D&D, like, having that surprise round was just like, I mean, if you had surprise, you were almost certainly going to win. And if you got ambushed, it was going to be a bad day.
Which makes actually perfect sense if you think about it from like a real, true combat sense. And I like that you use the word brutal. There's a lot. You actually think they use the word brutal many times in this game, I will say. But I think that is good. And again, it kind of, it's more of a focus on the narrative, and you're in and out of the combat. It's not really meant to, it seems like, to take very long, you know?
Yeah, frankly, like Hounds of the Tsar is kind of a game where if you are getting into a toe-to-toe combat with someone or something, I don't want to say you're playing the game wrong, but you probably messed up somewhere.
Right.
Because like I wanted to have that feeling of, you know, if you're fighting something supernatural, it's probably tougher than you. So you're going to be overmatched. If you're fighting it and it's a natural environment, you're really overmatched. You know, and like I wanted to grab onto that, you know, that feeling of an authentic medieval kind of experience of, look, you go into a fight with somebody with sharpened metal objects and muskets, bad things are going to happen really quickly, and you very rapidly lose control of the situation. However you thought it was going to play out might not be the way it plays out. And so it's probably best to put things in your favor so you don't have to be in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. Look, I want to talk about one more section here in the book here, and then I want to let you go, because we've been talking for a while here and I don't want to keep you for too long. But I was really, really impressed, and I kind of wanted to save my favorite part of the whole book for the last, and that's the GM section. It's basically the last about 20 pages of the book, and you've got a really nice little overview of history in there, but you're also kind of giving us, like, as GMs, like a little bit of an out by kind of admitting, as we already talked about, that the history of that time period isn't really 100% clear, and that we shouldn't really be necessarily expected to have like a PhD in Russian history to like understand and be able to run the game. There's like enough there that we can grab a hold of, but you're not expecting, and nobody should expect, that you have to know all those details to run the game. But there is enough there, which is really nice. But I also really loved how you have this section on magic, and you make it really very clear that it's just for NPCs. It's not a player thing. Like, the magic is like pretty much in the hands of the bad guys. I mean, you can do a little bit, there's ways to do magic, but like the magical creatures and the monsters are essentially in control of all of it. And for you to do it is really bad. I mean, it's going to probably cause you some trouble. So I kind of just want to talk a little bit about that, like, because I kind of like those kind of games where the adversaries kind of start, like, as you mentioned, they have a one-up. Like, the monsters are already, like, you're never really gonna be as powerful as the monsters. Like, I mean, I guess if you get all these mutations and stuff, it's conceivable. But for the most part, you're not going to be as powerful as the monsters. The monsters are going to kind of kick your butt, basically, at any time. Just talk a little bit about the GM portion of the book, if you will, and why you made some of the decisions that you did regarding to what you included, and, you know, as far as the history goes and the specific details there, and how you kind of decided on, well, these are the monsters that I want to use, which, by the way, are all very cool. Like, little,
Very cool.
Yeah, they're definitely based in Russian folklore and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool. That adds another level of the flavor to the game. But how did you kind of come to the decision? This is what I want to include in the GM section?
So as far as the set, like the kind of the setting description, yeah, I had to kind of make a nod to the fact that most people are not going to be super familiar with what 16th century Russia looks like. So I needed to give some sort of an overview, and without getting too exhaustive in it, because, you know, I love really detailed settings in the abstract. I despise them as a GM because it's just so much homework that I have to read through, and then I have to communicate it to the players. It's just like, oh my god. So, but I wanted to give as much as possible, and like I try to just hit on like what are like the really kind of important aspects of things, because I think everybody can kind of cling on to sort of a vaguely medieval kind of setting. You know, we kind of all have that default as gamers, I think. And just kind of touching on, it's like, okay, here's what makes medieval Russia unique. You know, here's, if you include these kind of elements or these flavors, it's gonna feel vaguely Russian, which is really just all we're going for. We're not going for like, you know, historical accuracy. We're just going for like a kind of like a flavor of authenticity. And then, you know, and then I did include a bibliography for anybody that wanted to do some deep dives into the history. And then as far as the magic system goes, you know, it's funny because there is a spell list in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't want to write the spell list. And I finally just caved because I just kept thinking about it, and I was like, people are going to want a spell list. Like they're just going to want examples. They're going to know, because I wanted them. One of the things that I don't like about role-playing games in this genre is that magic never feels unique, or it never feels as mysterious as it feels in a lot of fiction. And even in a lot of fiction, it doesn't always end up feeling mysterious. Because like my favorite kind of magic is stuff from like old, like Robert E. Howard Conan.
Yeah, yes, I know.
Where like
exactly.
there's some sorcerer and like he grabs like a handful of something over here and something over here, and like he throws it and he says something, and then like something bad happens and you're like, oh, what is that? And like the not knowing what it is and the not knowing how it works is really kind of pivotal to that whole genre and that whole feel. So I wanted to give GMs enough space to have like, look, if you don't want to think too much about magic, here's some random tables for like, you know, like magical ingredients, magical, like how long effects last, this, that. Here's a spell list, keep it rare, just, you know, use stuff from here, whatever. But also, if you want to totally make up a spell, have at it.
Yeah, that's what I love. That's what I wanted to interject here, because I love it. So this is, again, I'm like so sadistic here. There's like this, because you say like, there's a quote here. It says, because of this, many adversaries will be able to wield magic that is beyond the understanding and the abilities of the characters. You're essentially saying that the monsters can do whatever they want, and good luck characters. And the spell list, while it's actually pretty extensive that the players can utilize.
But it is vague.
Pretty basic, and it's vague. Yeah, so like, I mean, the game master, which... And I'm in that same place as you when it comes to like thinking of, like, I love the old school, you know, sword and sorcery books where the magic is like, is so special that like, for me, I'm like totally, you know, hobbling player character magic. And the bad guys are going to be doing that crazy stuff like you're describing, like grabbing the skull and like, you know, raising it in the air and light beams are shooting out of it and who knows what's happening. You know, they're summoning some horrible thing, you know. So I like that, because you're giving enough, like you said, that the players, there's something there to like grab a hold of, but it's not really like ultimately the game master has full control over how this stuff is going to work.
Yeah, because like to me, like nothing kind of like sucks the magic. Well, the magic, as it were, out of the moment more than when the bad guy shows up and he starts doing something and one of the players says like, oh, he's casting this. He's casted this spell, or oh, it's that spell, or oh, he's casting that spell, so that means he's got to be a this level wizard.
Oh, that's the worst.
And like that and it just totally breaks the suspension of disbelief for me. And like then you start, and it's one of the reasons also why like I wanted to make the combat system as abstract as possible, because nothing pulls me out of the moment more when we put the little battle mat on the table and we start moving the figures around, and it's just like, well, I want to think about like, what am I doing in the moment? Not like, what is the most mechanically advantageous for me to do at the moment? I want that. I'll play a board game.
Exactly. So talk about monsters. Let's talk about the monsters, because it's a really nice little section. I mean, you just say sample monsters. And I love, by the way, the art that you picked up, to add with it as well. And you only have a few monsters here, but they're all really cool. And they're obviously based in sort of Russian folklore and history. So talk a little bit about sort of your decisions on those.
Yeah, so so I tried to make the monsters as kind of like give them as much of like a sort of Russian flavor as I could. So some of them are kind of drawn from I wouldn't say any of them are like specifically drawn whole cloth. There's like kind of the forest spirit that's a little bit more direct. There's kind of like the werewolfy kind of creature. The actually one of the creatures that's in there, the sort of the flesh-eating demon, that actually comes from a short story that I wrote.
Oh, really?
It's like, I guess canonically, it's a Hounds of the Tsar story, because there is an Oprichnik in it who's like hunting the monster. So what is this story? I mean, tell the people, like, if people want to read this, I mean, they might be able to get a little flavor. Yeah, so the story's called Rain and Iron. It's been in a couple different anthologies. It's in an anthology that I put out called Distant Worlds. I'm forgetting which volume it's in. That would be important information to know that I should have. I am planning to like kind of like release it for like something for the Kickstarter. So like you'll probably be getting it in some form here sometime soon. I'm gonna try to do like a little like illustrated version of it. So it will be coming along. And it's like you'll love it. It's really dark.
Oh man, the stuff I've been reading lately. I'm all about the grim really dark.
It's one of those stories where like I've had people read it and they'll be like, "There's something wrong with you." Yeah. But yeah, so that monster's there, and then I'm not sure, because I did do there was a previous version of the game that was on itch. So I don't know which version you have. Does it have the dragon in it?
No dragon.
Okay. So all right. The new version, which has gotten because I redid all the layout, redid a lot of the art to make it just kind of more consistent.
Ooh. Okay.
And it has a new monster in it, which is the I'm gonna pronounce it wrong. It's the Zmei, which is kind of the classic Russian multi-headed dragon. It's really nasty. You don't want to fight it.
Nice. What, I want to use it against my players.
I think it even has a disclaimer where it says like, this is a fearsome opponent that is probably beyond the power of even an experienced group. Use it at your which is what a dragon should be.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. And I'll kind of want to point, I'll just mention this too, is, we're talking about Last Redoubt games and your game stuff, but I wanted to mention here, I might as well, that, BenjaminSperduto.com has all of your books, including the Black Spire books and all that. So, people are interested in sort of catching up with the other half of your creative output. That's out there as well. I want to finish up with one last thing here about the game that I think is really fascinating. And that's the way that you have kind of put together the adventure setup. You've got it organized it into these mission sheets. So describe that, if you will, because I think that was really kind of cool and sort of a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, these are, I mean, they really ended up being more like outlines. I think, I think there was I had kind of had an intention to make them a little bit more detailed, but I wanted to make sure that they all fit on one page. So the purpose of the mission sheets is really just kind of to give you a rough outline of an adventure framework of say like, okay, here's the location, here's the situation, here's a couple character names or a couple of figures that you could come up with that might be here. Here's some potential adversaries, and then kind of like a loose sort of kind of 3 or 4 act structure of like, this event's going to happen, and then this event happens, and then this event happens. And then also this event this could happen, blah, blah, you know, you have like some options in there. And it's really more for someone who's deciding that they're just going to run a quick session or two to kind of look at the sheet and say like, oh, okay, it's going to be in this town. All right, well, who should the merchant in this town be? Oh, it's going to be this guy, or it's going to be that guy. So it kind of just gives you like that rough skeleton that you can like quickly put names to stuff and then kind of take it off in whatever direction you want to go in. Because I don't really like doing like writing out like full length adventures, mostly because I don't even do that when I write games. Or when I play games, it's like, I don't know, I'm going to make it up, or like, I'm just going to have like a really rough outline, and I don't want to railroad people, so do whatever.
No, I'm the same way. And, actually, I want to kind of point people out to this, because I believe there's 5 of these mission sheets in the back of the book, at least in the version that I have. And one of them is Rain and Iron. Yeah, so that is definitely kind of...
It is loosely based on the short story, yeah.
Very cool. And so one of the things, though, is that the reason why I like this, why we're going to point this out, is because I feel like it fits into the general concept of the game, which you're saying, well, maybe you want to make them longer or whatever. But I actually kind of feel like this is the kind of game where it is better, I think, and better executed if the game master is running it from a place where everything isn't written down like that it does allow a certain level of flexibility and kind of going with the flow as far as how the characters are interacting with the world, how the world is coming together within your group, because you know how that's different every single time. I mean, you're talking about historical Russia, but it is an alt history game. So what that means is totally different to every single group. And so it's kind of nice not to be like, well, here's a map and it has all these houses on it, and like each one's listed and it has every NPC, and here's where the forest is, and here's the dungeon, and like, it doesn't have all of that. It's just enough that you can like, I mean, I've read this book well enough. I could probably run a game with maybe an hour of prep work at this point, and I would feel totally comfortable. Now, I think you have to be that kind of game master, but I also think the audience that you're speaking to who would be interested in this game are the kind of game masters that are comfortable in that place where you don't necessarily need to have a giant binder before you play session 1 that tells you the entire history of the world that you're playing in with all of the NPCs laid out. It's like, here's enough. Let's see what happens next.
Right. Because I've always felt that, like, honestly, I don't think most players want that. Really, because the players want it to be their story. They don't want to kind of. It's one of the reasons why, like, I always love the idea of playing in a playing a Star Wars RPG until I sit down to play in the Star Wars RPG, and then it's like, oh God, all right, I know who this guy is. I know what's going on here. Now my character has to pretend like I don't know who this guy is, and so, and to me, it just always feels very constraining. Or it's the opposite, where you feel like you don't know stuff that you should know, like not knowing you as a player, not knowing the things that your character would know about the world that they live in. Mm-hmm. And like this game this game kind of runs into that problem, but I felt like since you kind of know what the social structure looks like, and then, I mean, in this period of history, you move like 5 miles from where you live, and like you might as well be in another country. Like you don't know there. Like you don't know what the power dynamic is like going on like 100 miles away from your village. Like it's like going to a different planet. So like you're kind of already removed from that situation, and you're kind of walking into all these places cold, and you're like, well, I'm here on the Tsar's authority, so everybody better step to.
Yeah, and I think that, game masters, I think you can rely on the fact that your players are probably going to buy into whatever you're selling if you do a good job of selling it. Like, I ran, we were talking before we started the interview, a game that I feel has like a little bit of a similar heart, though a different background, and that's the D-Sanction. And I ran a game of the D-Sanction a couple weeks ago, and one of the players is in the game is British, and we're playing like in an area that he knows like of in the real world, but he also knows that in the time period that we're playing in, like those details that he knows about the world now really didn't matter at all. So like it didn't impact that negatively. The most important thing was just getting the feel of what the game is about, and once you got the feel, I mean, isn't it kind of our jobs as game masters to just sort of professionally BS our way through like a session, and then just do it again the next session, and then do it again the next session, just perpetually for as long as we can get away with it?
Yeah, and I think players generally are like willing to kind of go with the flow of stuff. I've always felt like, as running games where, stuff will happen, and I'll just like obsess about something for like 2 days. You're like, oh God, that one stretch was just so awkward, or like, and then like I'll ask somebody, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't even notice, whatever. Like it's like,
right.
It's weird, but like, whatever. We forgot about it.
Yeah, right. That's not even, and those are never the moments that people even fixate on anyway. Like players always find their own thing that you don't think like matters at all is the most important thing of their entire adventure. So I kind of feel like what's great about this game is it gives you enough detail and enough to work with that you can have a nice, strong, solid foundation to build the game on. And then each table can kind of take it their own direction. And I think that that's what I love about these mission sheets, because they're not necessarily, actually one of the hardest things for me is like thinking of names and village locations and stuff like that feels period specific, and you give her those details, and like that's all I need. Like once I can do that, stories are stories. You know what I mean? Stories are stories. So like once you kind of have those details figured out, I think it goes a long way. So anyway, I love the game, and I know you've doubled your goal amount at the time of this recording here so far. So congratulations on that. You've already met your goal, but as I mentioned before, I really want you to get to the 2000 goal, because I really want to get that Tsar die, the special limited edition D4.
The very last minute Kickstarter edition.
Rob just wants the shiny Tic-Tacs.
What you did not see was me like designing it and like putting like each image that's on it, like mapping each of it onto the side of the D4, and then seeing the rendered example of the D4, and then remembering it's like, oh, that's not how a D4 works, Ben. It's not one thing on each side.
Oh no.
And then spending like 20 minutes looking at one of my D4s, trying to figure out how all the sides were mapped so that everything would come together.
Oh my God. Hilarious.
Oh my God. The trials and tribulations of a game designer, apparently. Well, Ben, if people want to get a hold of back the Kickstarter, find all of your games, what's the best way for people to do that? How can people get a hold of you? How can people not only find this game, but find your other games? Because you've done a lot of really great games. I mean, we've talked about, I love Weirdwood. I haven't gotten a chance to dive into Augmented yet, but I can't wait to play a rules-lite cyberpunk game, because I love cyberpunk and I hate every cyberpunk game. So it's kind of like you in Star Wars. I like open up, I'm like, yeah, cyberpunk's awesome. And then I'm like, damn it, there's a lot of rules. Yep. And I don't really want to play it. So I'm excited about that. And this game looks amazing, and I can't wait to play it. if people want to back this game, people want to find out more about any of your games, how can they do that? What's the best way for people to do that?
Yeah, so Hounds of the Tsar will be running for the next couple weeks on Kickstarter. It's Hounds of the Tsar print edition, so where you can find it. And then for all my other stuff, you can get digitally. You could go to the main website, which is www.lastredoubtgames.com. You can actually order physical copies of Weirdwood and Augmented directly from the website now.
I saw that. I was excited that you could
finally bit the bullet and set that up. And then you can get all the games digitally on itch.io or DriveThruRPG.
Yeah, and I'm going to say it again. If people are not yet really familiar with your games, the best way I think to get involved to back it on the Kickstarter is just do the House of the Tsar or the Hounds of the Tsar print copy with all the PDFs. It's like $50, but you get so many games and so much content.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's just ridiculous because we did that for the Augmented Kickstarter, and it's like I haven't even read all the games. I'm not even gonna lie. There's so much there, and it's all different genres. They're all equally well researched and have this really incredible background or a story that relates to you, and they're all really great. So Ben, we really appreciate you coming on today.
I'd say the consistency for all of them is like kind of this like rules-lite approach. We're trying to like kind of give you permission to sort of do what you want with the game. On the Kickstarter, you can actually add on. You can do add-ons for physical copies of Weirdwood and Augmented. As well.
I couldn't recommend Weirdwood enough. I mean, it was just such that turn. It's
so much.
Yeah, I actually was listening to one of your episodes the other day while I was on a flight, and it was the one where you were talking. It was the car episode where you were talking about running Weirdwood, and like listening to that whole setup and that whole situation was like, it was like, that is exactly why I did that game the way it was.
It's one of the most powerful.
It's something I never would have come up with in a million years on my own.
It was one of the more powerful role-playing experiences I've ever had. And that's a sign of a good game. I mean, good players too, but when a game has enough rules to guide you in a certain direction so that there's like an internal consistency, but allows enough freedom that good players can play well in that game. I think that's like the kind of medium that I'm always looking for. Now, sometimes a game can have a lot more rules and still do that, but the more you add, the better you got to be at making rules in order to stay in that place. And it's usually really hard. And I feel really good about this, and I can't wait to play Hounds of the Tsar. And Ben, we really appreciate you coming on, man, and telling us all about it. We'll be keeping our fingers crossed for that $2,000 mark, so that way that Rob can have his own D4 to use with his gameplay.
All right, well, thanks for having me. This has been great.
RPGs and Baby Makes 3 is a production of Gretchen and Rob sitting on their couch. Email the show at rpgsandbabymakes3@gmail.com. You can find more episodes on Podbean, Spotify, and iTunes, as well as on our free Patreon page at patreon.com/RPGs and Baby Makes 3.